Welcome back for another UCS learning tutorial. And I'm all about example-based learning. So in this video, we're going to be learning how to add a light dado to the bottom of a cabinet or anywhere we want to in the cabinet. So as I write the UCS, you're going to see why I do things, and I'm going to try to explain as I go. And just by watching this video, you're going to pick up a lot of things that's going to help you in your own UCSs that you want to write. So let's get into it. Okay, so in Cabinet Vision 2024, I have a cabinet here. This is a wall cabinet. And what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to click on the bottom. And then I want to be able to enable an attribute that adds a dado and then gives me a few options for customizing that dado. And so what that's going to do is now whenever someone's drafting a job for the first time, they don't have to go into the CAM editor, and deal with trying to position a dado and, get all that stuff worked out. We want to make it as simple and as repeatable as we possibly can. And like I said, this is a learning tutorial. We're not just doing this for the example of adding a light dado. Just by watching this, you're going to learn how to add an operation to any part you want. So let's get started. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to add our attributes. And then as we get the attributes added, we'll start putting logic to those attributes. So let's go into our UCSs. And we'll add new. I'll just call this light dado. We'll leave it on add. We'll add an operation for dado. And we'll link it to a bottom. Now I'm going to show you toward the end of the video how we can add this to multiple different parts, not just the bottom. But for right now, I want to keep it simple. Make it work on just the bottom, and then we'll expand our horizons as we go. And that's really all I want to do, so I'm going to hit finish. And let's go to the code button to view what it generated. Okay, so it added for each BO part, which is bottom, that's good. And it added this groove for me. So really quick, just to explain a couple things. The very first line is simple. This is just a description. And you can see it's green, which means it's just a comment. It's not actually being processed in the code. I can add any weird characters behind here and it's fine. And you can see, we gave it our name of light dado. This is just an extra description where you can go more in depth. And I will say the better you name things, the better off you'll be, because as you get 50, 100 UCSs in here, it's easy to kind of forget what you had in mind when you were writing it. So I do advise that you put a good description in. So adds a light dado to cabinet parts. Pretty basic, but again, if there's things that are important that you want to be able to display at the main screen, it'll help you recognize it when you're looking at it. So that's line 1. You just give it that extra little friendly description. Line 2, I typically leave blank. And then line 3 is our for each line. Now, if you've watched previous videos in my course on UCSs, I've talked a little bit about the for each line, but that's basically what part is impacted. And I gave the example of just making the part 100 wide so you could see how the for each impacted what was in that line. But for this example, we're going to keep it simple. I'm not going to go down a bunch of bunny trails. So it says for each bottom part, and we're going to be adding a groove to that. So I don't really want to get into the dado just yet because I don't have the fields I need yet, because I want to make this customizable. I don't want to make it hard-coded. So let's just move this down. And on line 5, I'm going to write my first attribute. Most times when I'm writing UCSs, there will always be attributes involved. And what an attribute is when you see something on the sidebar that you can either do true or false, or maybe it's a drop down, or maybe it's a place to type in a measurement. But that's what gives you flexibility and control inside of Cabinet Vision. So our very first attribute is going to be simple. We're going to just have a simple on and off toggle. So the first line of the attribute is going to check if it already exists. So I'm going to say if, and I'm just going to make up a name. I'll just call it CE light dado, add, equals null. Okay, and again, as I've mentioned in other videos, don't panic when you see this type of code. It's very simple, it's very repeatable. Once you've added one attribute, you can add them all. So this is just a made-up name. I like to always start it with my initials. In my case, this is for Cabinet Explorer. And then I like to give it just a somewhat descriptive but still a short name for the parameter. And the reason I always start them the same, like not only with my initials, but like I'll always prefix any parameter I have with light dado. And I'll show you this here in a minute once we have a couple. But when I go into the object tree, I want them all grouped together. I don't want them just scattered. Here's an A, here's a F, here's a Z. I want to start them all with the same prefix, anything that's related to each other. So that's the first line of adding an attribute. I'm just going to kind of add the 5 lines we need, and then I'm going to go back and summarize this. So I want to make it a Boolean, which is a true or false, and it's going to be false by default. I can put 0 or I can spell out false, either one. And then we have style of 1, and this is what makes it a sidebar attribute. And then for the description, this is kind of the friendly name that we're actually going to see. So again, I like to prefix these all the same. So every attribute I add in this UCS, I'm going to start it with lightdado.add because the sidebar just sorts alphabetically, so I want to keep them together. And then I just put this comment here just so you can see it. Style of 1 is for a sidebar attribute, 0 is just in the object tree, and 2 is a note. But 99% of the time, you're going to be doing style of 1. And then anywhere we have an if statement, we close it out with an end if. Okay, so this is very repeatable right here. There's going to be some things that change as we add different attributes, which you're going to see as we go down, because there's going to be a bunch of different attributes in this UCS. But this 5-line sequence is very repeatable. Like I said, once you've done one, you can add anything you want. Okay, so let's go see what we have just with these lines right here. So we set it to a Boolean, which is false by default. We told it to show up on the sidebar, and then we gave it a little bit more friendly name. So let's go look at it. If I click on bottom, you can see I have lightdado add, and I can flip it true and false, which does nothing right now because we haven't gave it any logic. And now you'll notice we don't have that attribute on the top or on an adjustable shelf or anywhere else for that matter. And that's because our for each line is just the bottom. So now real quickly, just as an example, if I would add top, now when I click on top, that attribute would be on top as well. Okay, so I'm going to take top off because again, I like to keep it simple when I'm first writing the UCS. We'll add that later on. Let's go into more of our logic. So the next step I want to do is when this is enabled, I want to give it some additional options. I want to be able to control, how wide the dado is, how deep it is, how far it is from the front, and some different things like that. And we only want those to show up when it's true. So first of all, let me just add the second attribute. So again, just copy and paste this, because this is going to be very similar. But instead of lightdado add, it's going to be lightdado dx, or maybe you could say with. Again, these are just made up names that make sense to you. There's, just be consistent with your naming pattern, but you can make up whatever names you want. Okay, and then instead of a Boolean, if I'm wanting them to specify how wide the dado is, I don't want it to be a true or false, I want it to be a measurement. And let's just default it to a 1/2 inch by default. And then instead of lightdado add, I'll say lightdado width. Okay, so now we have 2 attributes. So before I talk about the logic of, this one only showing when it's turned on and making it go away when it's turned off, let's just look what we have so far. Now when I click on bottom, I have both attributes. But you can see, even when I turn it to false, that other one doesn't go away. And even's worse, when I pull a brand new cabinet out, even when it's never been true, it's still there in the first place. So let's add one line of code. So the only time we want to add this second attribute is when this is true. So let's copy this, and let's say if the main attribute equals 1, or you can say equals true. It's up to you how you want to do it. And Then we use our indenting to help keep stuff clear. And when I say indenting, anytime you have an if statement, everything inside of that if statement needs to be indented. And that helps us kind of, we can go straight down and see where the if statement is closed out. It helps us, keep track of our end ifs. Because when you're first writing over and over again, you'll forget to put an end if, or that's the part that will trip you up the most, is just getting your ifs and end ifs in the right place. So to get your indenting right is absolutely critical. And I'm going to show you one thing, a couple keyboard shortcuts that are very useful. If you want to just kind of start from scratch and get everything aligned left, if you hold Shift and Tab and just keep tapping that as many times as you need until they're all in line, that gets you a fresh start. So if you've added a bunch of spaces or a bunch of different tabs, this kind of gets everything in position. And then, I know that this, means main attribute is on. And then I know that this end if was intended for that if up there. So I can highlight with my mouse everything in between and just hit Tab, and that indents everything. And then again, the little attribute, I can just highlight everything and hit Tab. And you'll hear me focusing the formatting a lot because it makes it more readable, it makes it simpler. And for someone who's just beginning, I think that is a great place to start. It's not something that you should, just start with the programming and then get the formatting. I believe formatting should be first and foremost because it just makes everything simpler when you get that right. Okay, so we've added an if statement that says if the main attribute is turned on, then we want to go ahead and add this little secondary attribute that asks how wide the dado is. So let's look what that does. I'm going to pull a cabinet out again. And now when I click on bottom, I just have my main attribute. And when I turn it on, then it gives me the secondary option, which is good. We're almost there. Now, the only problem is when I turn it back off, it doesn't go away. And some people may not think that's an issue, but as you get more and more attributes, especially at the cabinet level, it starts really getting messy when you leave all those attributes that aren't relevant. So I'm going to show you how to clean that up. And again, literally almost every UCS I write will have attributes. And so what I'm showing you here is the structure for almost every UCS you're going to write. So I'm going to introduce a new concept called else. We just said that if the main attribute is on, do all of this. But then here at the bottom, I'm going to say else. And I'm just going to leave a little comment in green just so we can visualize this. But okay. So if it's true, if that main attribute is turned on, it does all of this. And then if it's not true, it'll do this little section right here. And what I want to do is I want to delete that little secondary attribute. And again, it may be starting to look a little overwhelming, but as you write your first UCS, whether you're copying me on this one or doing something very similar, this structure, again, 99% of the time, you're going to have a main attribute that turns it on, and then you're going to have this same format where you add secondary attributes, and then you clean them up if the main one's turned off. So you can kind of memorize that pattern. So if it's turned off, I expect that secondary one to delete itself. So we turn it on, we get the secondary one, we turn it off, it goes away. And that is good, clean code. And that is how you make happy drafters in Cabinet Vision, by keeping their sidebar as clean as possible. Our goal should always be to only show relevant information. And obviously when you turn it on, we want to see all those additional options, but when we turn it off, we like it nice and clean like that. Okay, let's add a couple more of the secondary attributes, and then we'll get into customizing our data. So I'll just copy this little secondary thing for width, and let's make one for depth. So again, we just make up a name. And again, I'm going to restate, always prefix your parameter names with the same prefix. And I'm going to show you why I do that. So I'm just going to default this to 3/8 for the depth and change the description. So now you can see I have width, and I have depth. So let's go look at why I stressed the prefix so much. So let's turn this on, and then let's look at the object tree for bottom. You see how these are grouped together? If you would put, CE with light dado, it would show up out here. And if you have a bunch of other parameters, when there's just 3, it's not that big of a deal. But again, we have to think ahead, and what happens if we have multiple UCSs running? We want to make this as easy as possible to troubleshoot, so we can come in here and easily find these things that go together. And same thing with the sidebar. That I always start it with kind of the category name, like light dado dot, and that keeps these together. Because if I have a random thing about sync skirt or extend, or if I have other attributes here, I don't want them mixing in between my options here. So very important that you keep that consistent prefix on both the parameter name and the description. Okay, let's add a couple more. Let's say we want to have a way so we can adjust it from the left. Because maybe I don't want it to go all the way out to the end. So let's put this at 0 by default, and then just put left adjust in the description. And I'll make a right one as well. Okay, so we're going to stop there for a little bit, and I'm going to go into giving the dado some intelligence. And this is pretty common kind of order of events for me. I'll get my attributes in place, and then I'll start adding the parts or customizing the parts, depending on what logic is needed. So I want to take this code here that we generated right from the beginning from the wizard, and I'm just going to cut that, and I want to paste it inside my little slot here, because I don't want this to happen when it's turned off, right? And everything inside here is only running when that main attribute is on. And again, it's easy to see the structure of this because it's formatted well. So again, just a note, focus on the formatting, don't try to skip to the fun stuff. Okay, so now we're gonna work on the part that actually adds the dado. Up here we're adding all the attributes. And I'm just gonna put a couple comments there just so we can kind of see the sections. Here we're adding the attributes, down here we're adding the data. Okay, so the first thing is it's called dim groove as new dado. So if I go into the object tree right now and open up the bottom, you'll see an operation called groove. Now, I'm a big fan of making things super relevant in the object tree. Groove is not very descriptive, so I'm going to call it light dado instead of groove. Now, on operations, we have this flexibility that we can name it whatever we want. Like, as long as it's called out as a dado or as a route, whatever, it doesn't really care about this. Now, if you're adding a part, say dim board as new part, we don't really have the same flexibility. It's important that that ties back to a part in our library. But on operations, we can name it something that makes more sense to us. And so now when I go into the object tree, I see bottom, light dado. And so now when I come here and I'm troubleshooting this, I'm like, why is light dado showing up? Now I have a very good idea where it's coming from. And then one final thing that I'll always do, again, just to help things make as much sense as possible, is I always add a description, whether it's an operation or a part. I like to give it a friendly name. And so now I got the little friendly name for light dado, and the actual operation is called light dado. So now there's no doubt. And again, I'm showing you my process. I'm showing you things that I think are important. And even if things are kind of seem overcomplicated right now, it's okay. Stay with it. As you watch more and more of my example videos, with each video you're going to pick up just little snippets here and there. And every video like this that you watch, you're going to have something else that you can add to your skill sets, like, oh, I know how to add an operation to a part. Oh, I know how to change the description. Oh, I know how to add an attribute. Like, we start picking up all these things that now our mind starts racing, thinking of all the ways that we can utilize these skills. So let's go back to our data and let's give it some information. So just like with parts, like I've talked about in previous videos on my course, we have our sizing parameters, we have our positioning parameters, and then we have our rotation parameters, which I don't think we're going to need rotation for now. But that's kind of the same logic that happens. Now, anytime you have an operation, it's very important that you add face WP. And what this means is, imagine if you would go to, let's go to the top and go to cam, it makes you pick whether you're on the front or the back, right? So if I had a dado to the front, that gets face WP of 1. Now if I delete that and add a dado to the back, that gets face WP 2. Now, like I said, it's very important for an operation that you tell it what face it's on, because a lot of times what will happen is if you leave that line out, it'll look good in cabinet vision, but when you go to screen to machine, it'll be missing. So that's important. Now, another thing that I always do on dados is I use a dado called Dado EX. And it's kind of weird why they even have 2 dados here, but if you actually go to the help topics, you can see that here's the valid types for, to create new parts. You can dim as a dado, or you can dim as a Dado EX. And it has to do with getting the dado on the right face in Screen to Machine Center. I'm not even going to totally go into that. You can use dado, but a lot of times what happens when you use dado is it'll look right in cabinet vision, but it'll be cutting on the wrong side of the sheet or not cutting at all. So in this video, I'm going to be showing you that I'm using Dado EX, and to be honest, 95% of the time I use Dado EX if I am dimming a dado. Now, let's put some sizing information in here so we can see our dado pop up. So instead of hard coding a width, I want to map it back to this attribute I created because I want the user to be able to customize the dado width. So let's put that for the DX. Now for the DY, I don't have an attribute for this. I want it to follow the part. So, in my for each statement, I know I'm on the bottom. So essentially I want it to follow the bottom's length. And if I go to the object tree and just kind of click on bottom, and if I find, DX is representing the width of the part, DY is representing the length, which is what I would want. So if I would, you can see light dado is a child of bottom. You can see how it kind of branches underneath it. So if I just put :.dy, that'll tell it to look at the bottom's length. So down here in dy, we just put :dy. Colon means parent. If I would do just dy, it would try to reference itself, which doesn't have a size, which doesn't make sense. :dy goes up 1 level, sees that the bottom is a parent of this, and finds its dy. Okay, and then for the depth, we have another attribute for that. And there we go. I'm going to leave off the positioning for just a little bit. I just want to see this working. So let's play with this. Now you can see it's right at the edge of the part. I want to add one more attribute for distance from front, but we'll get to that. So let's turn it off. And notice my other attributes didn't delete. I forgot to add those in. So let's first take care of that. So you remember when I showed you that whole delete thing? That was when I just had one attribute. I need to add that for all of these. So if the main attribute's turned off, we delete the width, we delete the depth, and we delete the left, and we delete the right. Okay. Now when we click on bottom, we have our true and we have our false. And you can actually see the dado turning on and off with our true and false, which is good because if you remember, we have this whole section that only runs when it's turned on. So what I have highlighted is only running when that main attribute is on. And again, it's easy to see because of the indenting that I have. Okay, let's test our attributes. So data width, I could make this 1 inch, I could make the depth a 1/4 inch. And so you can see we have control, and now the user isn't locked into what we defaulted this data to. They're still able to customize this. So let's add one more attribute that we can control how far from the front of the part this will be. Okay, so let's just copy light data depth and just paste it underneath. And I'll just call this from front. And we're going to just call this description from front. And we're going to make it 2 inches by default. And then because we added an attribute, I'm just going to go right down here to where it cleans up these and add our little delete command. So every secondary operations, every attribute except for the main attribute will go down here. So as we add new ones, we just got to make sure we put them down and delete. And it's pretty easy to test if it's if you're cleaning everything up just by turning it on and off. You can see if you have everything in there. Okay, so now you can see I have my light data from front, and I can change that, but my data is not moving. So let's give it some intelligence. Data from front, and I'm going to put it on the X position. And now our light data has some intelligence. So now we can customize where the light data is. And so this is a cool little piece. Even just here in just a few minutes, we have a very functional light data UCS. And all of this is customizable by the user. Instead of taking 5 minutes in the CAM editor to add, and if people were even able to figure it out, now it's all just very simple controls. Okay, now let's do our left and right option. I have this left adjust to where if I put in 5, I want to see it pull away for 5 from the left. So let's make that logic work. I'll just copy that parameter. And notice where I put dy. Remember I copied it to the bottom's length? Well, that's true. I do want it to be the bottom's length, but I want to subtract the left data, or the left adjust, and the right adjust. And so these are going to be defaulted as 0. So by default, it will assume that we want it the full length, but then as we customize this, it will take it off. Now, I will also have to add this to my Y position, but I'm going to leave it off for right now, just so we can see what's happening. So you can see that, when I typed in left, it actually came from the right. Now, if I type in right, it's correct, which is normal and expected. I said I have to add it to the Y position, but I wanted to show you what it was doing. Because if you think about, on the bottom, it's starting from over here. So we can't just change the length because it will always decrease from here. So whenever the left adjust is changed, we also need to move the Y position. And so we'll do that. We'll put the left adjust as our Y value. And again, if the left adjust is 0, then it's fine. We'll let it right where it is. Okay, let's 0 this out so we can see this again. Okay, so whenever they're both 0, which they are right now, left and right adjust are both 0, it's just a full length data. Now if I put 5 on the left, that pulls it in. If I put 3 on the right, that pulls it in. And there's so many ways you can continue to, make this better and better. You could put a little wire chase. You could make so you could flip it front to back. In fact, I'm going to just go ahead and do that because that's a pretty common one. So let's add another attribute for face. So let's just put that right in here. We'll call this light data face. And this time I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to call this an integer, and we're going to make a drop down. I like using drop downs because you can, give the user a little bit more kind of visual explanation of exactly what you're doing rather than just a true or false. Sometimes a true or false is okay, but sometimes we need just a little bit more information. Like I want to be able to say front equals 1, back equals 2. So now on our sidebar, we're going to be able to flip sides. So let's just put this, and because I gave it a value of 1 and 2, and remember I showed you earlier that front is 1 on face WP and back is 2. Now I could literally just put in face right here, and we'll see it flipping. Now, I'm going to go look at this and show you what it does, but there's actually one more step I'm going to do, because you'll see that my from front attribute won't make sense when it's on the back. So if I click on bottom, let's just change this to 1/4 inch deep so we can see it. Now, you see I have a new attribute called face, and I can flip it to the back. Now, when you flip sides, it totally messes up the X position, which rightfully so, because the origin point is changing. But, now my from front measurement doesn't make sense because now it's 1 from the back, not from the front. So I'll show you a little trick that I like to do. I can say just a little bit below this attribute, I'll say if this attribute equals 1, then I'll just put a little comment that says front so I know what I'm doing. And then else. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a secondary thing to hold the value here. Actually, I take that back. I want to actually move the X position whenever this is true. So let's just call it temp X, give it a measurement, and set it to 0 for right now. And then just looking at this down here, whenever it's on front, we'll do just this. We'll just pull it in from the side. But whenever it's on back, I'm going to take the part's width and then minus that. And now what happens is, as we flip this, the reference point from the front will always be correct. And now instead of using this little attribute, I use my little temporary X parameter. Okay, now that may have not made a whole lot of sense, but you'll get into more and more in this as you get into kind of some advanced stuff and as you start compensating for just different values, whether it's in the construction method or whatever. You'll have to do these little secondary value or reference parameters, just like what I did here. So now, look at the difference we have now. Now I can do front and back. Now you can see it's actually off by just a little bit. And I think what it is, so like this is 2 inches to the front. Yes. But whenever I flip it to the back, it's actually off by whatever the width of the dado is. So let me add one more thing in there, because I want that to be exactly the same. So let me just copy the light dado width and take that off of whenever it's on back. My X position is now going to take into account the dado width as well. So now you can flip it front to back, and it's in the exact same space. And as we change it, now we have that, which is awesome. Okay, so that's just a very quick example of how different scenarios require different programming. Now here's something else that will just totally throw you for a loop. Notice how at the bottom, you see the little origin point right here, that little blue dot. That's in the front right now for me. Now when you guys go to replicate this, depending on what question you have answered for this in the bottom area, you go exterior case and then deck. They started adding all these questions about face up and face down, which is excellent for one-sided materials. But let me show you what happens just when this question alone is different. You saw how the origin point was at the front. Now it's at the back. And now that messed up my entire UCS. And this is exactly this is exactly why so many people have bad UCSs in their system. is because as a UCS writer, we have to be very diligent in thinking about what all is impacting this, what all do I have to allow for, and how am I going to resolve this. Now, I'm a personal fan of making sure that those face-up, face-down questions are consistent across all construction methods, but sometimes it may not be able to. Sometimes we have to program for that, and we can literally look up that question and say, okay, if this question is on face up, do it this way. If this question is on face down, do it this way. And I get into that type of thing all the time, because when I try to make products for my store, I want to make them universal so that anyone can plug it in. And so for me especially, I have to be very, very cautious with, okay, what if the person has this selected, or what if they're building it this way? Now, if you're just writing UCSs just for your shop, you don't necessarily always have to think about those things, but stuff like this, you'll run into this type of situation over and over again of, okay, why is my UCS working on this construction but not on another construction? And so these are things we have to deal with. Now, I'm not going to go all the way in depth on how I would fix that in this video, because I want to, stay on point, but I did want to address that, because when you guys go to start copying it, you might notice that your X positions and some of your positioning parameters are not the same as mine, because it's so dependent on how your construction is set up. So I said at the beginning that we was going to make this work on other parts as well. So let's add this to the top. And we can do that by just adding a pipe character and then add TO for top. That's how we do multiple parts. And again, if you ever are unsure what to call a part, you can just select it and open the object tree, and you can see TO is right there. This part, I'm guessing, is going to be backwards. Yes, for the same reason. The origin point is in the back, whereas down here, the origin point is in the front. So, now this is an example where evens, regardless what I have in the construction method, I do have to address this, because I want my top to work a certain way and I want my bottom to work, another way. So let's see if we can address that. Okay, so what we can do is we can say if name equals bottom, then do this, else if name doesn't equals bottom, basically all other parts, we can just kind of put the reverse of this in. So I'll copy this over to here. I'm actually not sure if I got this right or not. We'll see. Yeah, that looks better. Okay, and now what's cool about this is just with that one thing, which, arguably this should maybe, default to back here instead of to front. So I'm going to do one other thing. Right here where I ask for the face, right inside my attribute, let me just make this bigger so we can see what I'm doing. When somebody pulls a cabinet out and then turns this on for the first time, I'm going to make it work differently. So I'm going to say if name equals bottom, we'll go ahead and add it in this exact order. Otherwise, all other parts we're going to add it backwards. So whenever you're doing a list, whatever you put first is what will be the default. So if the name is bottom, we're going to assume it wants to be on the front side, but if the name is top or anything else, we're going to assume that it wants to be the back side. Now I know this is getting complex, but hang with me here because this is an important concept here. So now when I turn this on for the first time, oh, I need to delete my face then when that's let me go do that real quick. It's so easy to forget, when you add an attribute, to go add it down here. And you can see it cleaning stuff up is very, very important to me. Okay, so now you can see that defaults to back when you turn it on, whereas this one defaults to front. And again, it's totally, up to you on how you want to use this. But now I'm going to show you how easy this is as we get into other parts. So, we might want to do this on a fixed shelf as well, right? So let's go to fixed shelf and click on him. Nothing's showing up yet. Let's go add it to the for each line. So we go fixed shelf. Now when I click on it, I have my attribute. Okay, now this one's correct. And so what's happening is, remember where I added that I reversed the little temporary X position? Because I said else, right now bottom is the only one that requires this setup. Looks like top and fixed shelf work the same. If that would have been backwards, I would have put or name equals fixed shelf. And we'll see that yet as we go here, but that looks good. And in fact, I want it to default to back as well. So I like that. Now, let's do what is this right here? This is a finished right end. So let's do a finished right end. Let's see where this comes in at. So that is going to be RF. And we got light Dado, and you can see it's backwards, right? I want it to come from the front. But because I have the system in place, all I have to do is come down here and say if name equals BO or name equals RF. And that's why it's so important that we don't start with a lot of parts. Like always start on one part and then, work your way in. And then, we're okay with it defaulting to the back because I probably want this to the inside. So that looks fine. Now we could do the left finished in. We don't have the attribute, so let's go add it. And we just tackle these one by one and kind of individually verify them. Because the thing about left and right ends is they always work opposite of each other, because the origin point on the left end will be back here, and on the right end it will be opposite. So now I have my left and right finished ends working. Now let's do unfinished ends. And so let's add LU and RU to the for each line. And let's see where these come in. Okay, so you can see RU is backwards. So we have a slot for that. We can just keep adding to, this is our little exceptions, right? Things that come in backwards, right? So all I have to do is, as we add each of these, all we have to do is just keep adding these. So now if name equals RU, that's good. And the left end came in fine. That's cool. Now we could do, applied, when we have applied finished ends. That creates a little sub end. Maybe we want to put a light Dado in here. I always forget the sub ends, so I'm just going to copy this. So I'll put the left sub end and the right sub end. Again, I know I'm moving kind of swift, but there's a lot to be learned here. Okay, so you can see left is correct, right is incorrect. So let's add right to our little exceptions. And then that comes in perfect. And so you can see how, there's so much that goes into writing a good UCS, because it's really, as a UCS writer, you need to be a good tester. You need to be able to think through logic. You need to be able to solve problems. You need to be able to keep, your code clean and well formatted. And some people, I've heard guys already say that, well, you shouldn't teach people how to write UCSs because it's too hard for them to write and they'll mess up their program. And, I'll definitely agree that, yes, you can have some very serious downsides if you happen to mess up an entire job because of a UCS you wrote. But I would argue that the cost of not being able to write UCSs is much greater than accidentally messing up one job. Because if you can learn how to write UCSs, you can automate anything you want in your shop. And that's what I spend, every day doing is, talking with shops, remoting in through TeamViewer, fixing bugs, writing new UCSs to automate processes in their shop, and just making things work smoothly. And, when you have a platform like Vision that opens the door to this kind of customization, you have to take advantage of it. Otherwise, you're not getting the most out of this product. Yes, this took a little time because I was, explaining myself, but even just as this went, I did this in 45 minutes, 40 minutes. As you write your first couple ones, I would fully expect it to take hours, even days. But now think of all the little parts of this that now. You know how to add the main attribute. You understand, my system for doing secondary attributes. You understand, how I like to never put numbers in. I always like to have an attribute so the user can customize it. You learned how to be able to show and hide attributes. And these are all things that you can use regardless of the example. This applies, like I said, almost every UCS will be formatted somewhat the same. You're going to be doing different things and achieving different goals, but a lot of it is the same, and you're just kind of repeating the same logic. So I know things got a little messy there when we had to, kind of do that little exception for the exposition. And then with the face, where we made some of them default to the back and some of them to the front. But I think it's important to show that because, not all UCSs are simple. I still, there's some days when I sit down and try to write something where, I have to scratch my chin a little bit because it is, some of these are very difficult to figure out. And sometimes the logic just, it's confusing. But if you can keep it simple, if you can keep it formatted well, if you can add comments to just, easily explain what you're trying to do, you'll be amazed what kind of UCSs you can write just by following along with some of these videos and picking up little tidbits here and there. That is a demonstration of how to add a light dado, and you are more than welcome to put this into your version. I think this is one it's a very powerful UCS. I think it saves a lot of time, and yeah, feel free to work your way through this and copy the code. I'll just open it here again so you can see. It's up to you on what all you put in the for each line. You may decide not to do the upright ones, but you're totally in control of that, because as you watch this video, you now at least have a basic understanding of what each section is doing. As we scroll through, it should be vaguely familiar, and you might even have the courage to go customize this now. I like this style of learning. I'm excited to be able to do more of these in the future, and let me know if you have any ideas for an example that you would like to see, and I will see if I can cover it for you. So thanks for watching, and one thing I might add as well is if you're in a period right now where you're learning, you're trying to get better at this, I would take a look at my Zero to Hero course. I go a little bit more in depth on some of the parameters and stuff. I'm going to be posting a lot of these to my YouTube channel as well, but if you want to go deeper, I encourage you to take a look at that course. So thank you again for watching, and hopefully this gives you a little push forward into opening your mind to some of the things that you're able to do.